Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Sleepless in Seattle. So, really, at some points, I'm just gonna go on and do some certain classic movies, regardless of how anybody would probably go on and be like, "Oh, you're watching these mushy romance films." Like, really? Sometimes there are certain movies where I go on and I'm just coincidentally watching them because someone else is watching them, or sometimes it's just, hey, let's make a joke and just watch this movie. There are actually some movies that I just kind of find fun. There's stuff like While You Were Sleeping, or Sleepless in Seattle, or some kind of stuff where you do go through these romance movies and whatever, and you kind of make fun of them, but eventually you just watch them nonetheless because they're fun to just kind of poke through and go through and whatever. So, really, I have fun watching this movie, even though when really looking at it, it's resting on the fact that this is to be a person calling into a radio station, and it doesn't seem like that is to possibly be at all a popular thing anymore. Like, we don't even really have much of radio stations anymore. Really, it's a lot of just kind of satellite music, or we of course have different approaches to stuff nowadays that kind of would make this movie seem older than it really is, because of a certain time of which that people are to call radio stations is to be kind of not so much of a real legitimate thing anymore. We have a lot of times where I think a lot of people would probably be listening more to podcasts than possibly radio stations now. So it's kind of turned out to be kind of a changing of way of which that people are approaching things. We really have it to where both Jonah and really his kind of back and forth contemplating of would be girlfriend here, Jessica. There we go. They're kind of the fun characters in this movie who are to desperately seek out romance for Sam, who is to of course be Tom Hanks's character here. We really have it to where when we kind of pull this movie apart a little bit, we do realize that Sleepless in Seattle is actually just a blatant copy of possibly another film, which they go on and say what exactly that film is in this movie. We showcase certain scenes of that movie, and we have this be like a consistent Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan thing, because You Got Mail wasn't exactly a very original movie either, because You Got Mail was also a movie uh, that was to be from something else, and I could go out of my way and just tell you to go and check out that other You've Got Mail review to see what the heck that was, because it's been such a long time ago since I remember what exactly it was that I said there. But I think I ended up saying what the actual movie was on in that thing. So go and check that out if you'd want to. You don't have to. I'm not trying to promote anything. I'm just saying, like, hey, I don't remember, so check out that review. Uh, we have some really interesting characters, and we have some interesting line delivery in this movie. There's something that kind of bugs me in this film, because we have Sam's character, who's Tom Hanks, who's going on and mentioning about the line of which that he is to mention about him breathing in and out, and kind of taking every day, just kind of remembering his wife, and how everything between them was just magic and so on and so forth. But it kind of feels like the line that he delivers about him kind of just getting up every day and breathing in and out, that all of a sudden feels very reminiscent to, of course, the end of Castaway, where we have Tom Hanks going on and eventually him having some dialogue about him just breathing in and out and going and eventually having the tide bring him a sail. And so, more than likely, I would want to desperately go back into Castaway at some point just to kind of see if that line is to be the exact same. Maybe a little kind of shade of Sleepless in Seattle, but I don't know. People could go through that movie and then could also go through this movie and kind of see if the lines are exact or identical or whichever. So we also have it to where Rob Reiner is to be in this movie, and his name is to be called Jay in this film. And it seems weirdly we have it to where it seems that Rob Reiner is to have lines about butts for whatever reason. Because in this movie we have it to where both Jay and Sam's character here are going on and talking about whether or not Sam has a nice butt or not. And I'm like, man, it seems like Rob Reiner weirdly likes to go into movies and talk about like butts for some odd reason. Because Rob Reiner was to also do a movie, I think, with Bruce Willis. And I think this was the movie where it was Bruce Willis, I think, with Michelle Pfeiffer. And where I think they were having like relationship problems. And so Rob Reiner, I think, was talking to Bruce Willis in some movie about how a butt is just like the extension of legs and or the end of legs or something like that. I'm like, what is up with Rob Reiner always having these like butt dialogues? I don't understand why the heck are we going into this kind of like thing consistently with Rob Reiner in a lot of his films. But yeah, I don't even know why I brought it up because like, but it just that's what kind of bugged me about this film. I'm like, why do they always talk about butts? What's up with Rob Reiner and butts? With him not only doing that, but then him going on and directing the film When Harry Met Sally, Rob Reiner, and his mother was to give the line of like, I'll have what she's having. So I wonder if Rob Reiner directed this film. If not, then I could be okay with that because he's in this film technically. So, excuse me. So, speaking of which, we also have it to where we have Tom Hanks's wife in this movie, which I kind of find to be interesting. Like she's in a small role. She's not in the woman that eventually is to end up with Tom Hanks in this film, but it's kind of interesting to see her in this movie. We also have it in this film where while I'm kind of watching this film and seeing how like Sam is to approach things, Tom Hanks is to approach everything, I see so much of his son like in this movie with Tom, where he's kind of acting and performing whatever. Like I can see how like Tom's son had picked up so much from his father when I kind of see Tom Hanks in this film. Because I would see so much of his son in a number of things. I'm like, oh, I guess that's the Tom Hank right there. That's the Tom Hanks. Because of course we have everybody who is to have some kind of mannerisms or have some kind of approaches and have some kind of that just feels like their fathers or their mothers or their whatevers. So, but anyways, now to make this a shorter approach here to kind of wrap this up here. What is this movie about? So we really have it to where this movie is to have, of course, Sam and Jonah Baldwin lose their lose of course their mother and their wife, and so they are to go on and decide to, instead of continuing to live in Chicago and never kind of get over this loss, we have it to where Sam decides that they need to move somewhere, and he decides to move to Seattle. So once they move to Seattle, a year and a half later, after still dealing with this loss, we eventually have Jonah at one point going and calling a radio station and eventually transferring over the phone to Sam. And Sam is going on to talk to Dr. Fieldstone, um, and try to work over this loss and kind of talk things out and kind of have him have really just Sam here mentioning how about that everything that was to go on with them was just magic between the two of them. And we end up having Sam, who is, I guess, either having a dream or just possibly having some moment where I guess he's to re-see his wife again and just kind of like have them kind of talk this moment out. So we go on, and eventually after this whole like radio call-in thing that Sam is to do, all of a sudden he's getting a number of letters from a number of women. Uh, and we also have certain women who are to have heard that whole radio station, and yada yada yada. So eventually we have Annie, who of course is Meg Ryan's character, who's to all of a sudden hear this radio uh, thing also, and decide that she wants to go on and come up with a way to write a piece about this whole story, wanting to go on and find Sam Baldwin, and go on to just figure out a way to write a story about this, which really is to just make her weirdly become this goofy stalker of a person. But eventually, we just find it towards like love, possibly at first sight, and so on and so forth. So, with that said, let's just go into spoilers about this one. Hopefully, I can go out of my way to say any number of things about this film, because I went on and I watched 3 episodes of Peacemaker after watching this movie, because I was just kind of waiting for Peacemaker to come out. So without a doubt, let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So I think the immediate joke of which that I would go on to make a funny thing about in this movie is because we have it to where this movie doesn't start out anywhere in Seattle. Because of course we have it where Sam and Jonah are to start out this film in Chicago, and we have Meg Ryan's character with, of course, her fiance that won't be a fiance with her forever, Walter, who is in Baltimore. I'm like, so neither one of these characters are in actually Seattle. What the fuck? Like, I thought that was just kind of funny for me to make a joke about that. That it seems that eventually Sam Baldwin is going to eventually end up in Seattle, uh, and so like that's why they call it Sleepless in Seattle. This guy isn't to always be in Seattle through this whole movie. So again, the beginning of this is to start in Chicago. So we go on and we have Sam and Jonah, who are, of course, are burying their mother and wife. And so we go on and we have, I think, Tom is to be a architect here, or a person that is to be this kind of guy who is to be a builder of homes, so to speak. And so we have, of course, Sam, who is to realize that they're never going to move on in Chicago, because everywhere they go, they, of course, are reminded about their mother or their wife, who, of course, is to be uh, Maggie here, Baldwin. So we have it to where Sam is wanting to decide to go into extreme measures to just say, okay, we're going to have to move to Seattle. So they go on and they move to Seattle, and it seems like they are going and moving to a home that is to be like right off the waters, the beach, the whatever waters. Yeah, that seems like a better approach to say here. Their home is like on a dock basically. It's interesting. So we go on and we have Sam uh eventually now in Seattle, and so with Jonah. And so we have, of course, moments where Jonah is to have these bad dreams. Sam is to go in and comfort him. And it seemed that Maggie was to go on and sing Blackbird, uh, of course, to comfort Jonah. But I don't think Sam was to remember that song. But weirdly, they have Blackbird playing in the background. So we have at some points that Jonah's worried that he's going to forget Maggie or what she looked like or certain specifics about the time in which that they had together. And Sam was like, "Well, hey, like kind of like just don't worry about it." So so eventually we kind of push on here, and so Jonah is going on and calling this radio station, and so Jonah is to call this radio station and then eventually force his father to answer this call and have it be this, of course, this Dr. Fieldstone. And so now let's transition a little bit here. So we go on. We have Annie who is with Walter, and they're in Baltimore, and Annie is going on, and she's going to her home for I guess because this is right around Christmas. I don't know why it is that I'm still technically doing some certain Christmas movies, but also this is technically to be a Valentine's Day movie because technically by the end of this movie it's Valentine's Day, so it's kind of like it's Christmas slash Valentine's Day. So anything in between those couple of months, uh, again, this wasn't on purpose. Like this was just a stumble upon movie accidentally. Like, oh, okay, let's just see this film. So Annie goes to Walter to this family dinner, and all of a sudden we realize that Walter is to seemingly be allergic to everything, but I guess he is to eat some certain kind of foods or he'd be dead at this point. So, but evidently Walter is to be allergic to wheat and like strawberries and a number of things. So we go on and we have, of course, this girl Irene and I think Harold Reed are going on and on about how this guy is to be allergic to bees, and we just continue to have them going on and on about this allergy to bees. And like, oh no, like I'm not allergic to that. I'm allergic to bees, and like we just have to where they keep going on and on about these bees things, and I couldn't help but start to laugh about all that. Um, so we go on here, and so after this whole party is to kind of be done, uh, we have, of course, now Annie and Walter scrambling to now try and make it to Walter's family for roughly Christmas, and so Annie had forgotten the present for Walter's mother, and so she scrambles back in there, and then she goes off. So we also are to know in this story that Annie and Walter are to be engaged, and so now Annie's mother is going and giving I guess her wedding dress to give to Annie. So I guess that's something borrowed, I guess. And so Annie is going on and or Annie's mother is going on and telling Annie the story of how uh, about her and her uh, husband had met. And I'm sure she had probably said this story a million times, but she still loves the story because it was just kind of this bizarre like meeting where we of course have it to where supposedly this guy wasn't supposed to be working that night, but weirdly he was, and so they just kind of weirdly met, and all of a sudden there's to be this like magic happening. So so yeah, like we have a lot of these like serendipitous like moments. If you've ever seen the John Cusack movie Serendipity, I think that has one of the Kate I want to say Beckinsale. I could be wrong about that. Uh, the Serendipity John Cusack movie. You can go ahead and check that out. I've seen it, like, because of course I've really just seen almost anything at this point. Uh, but uh, so yeah, so like we end up having this to where it's like bizarrely made to be. So we of course have Annie who is to be following Walter with her car, and so Annie is just telling Walter to go ahead of her while she goes and gets his present. And so we go on and we have Annie who's listening to the radio station and she's listening to this one goofy song called Horses, Horses, Horse and that has all this like weird mixture of Christmas music in it. And so all of a sudden we have Annie end up uh, on this radio station, all of a sudden listening to the story of Jonah eventually talking to this radio personality. And so we have Jonah transition to have Sam now being on the radio. And there's a lot of times here where I'm kind of hearing this radio thing. And I'm like, you know what? Like, this girl is just trying to, like, talk to this person to just get ratings on a radio station of, like, hey, tune in because you might get an interesting story like this. So now we can kind of put a pin in the whole Annie thing to go back into talking more about like Sam and Annie here. So we go on and we have Sam who's going and talking on this radio station, and we just have this doctor that's wanting to just go on and talk to Sam and just say like, well, hey, like uh, kind of unload, like get something off your chest about like you talking about your wife and for you to possibly move on here because it seems like you should go and try to move on because you've kind of still been single for a year in time now. So we go on and we of course have Sam who talks about his wife and that uh, is kind of one of those magical kind of moments where they both were to meet and instantly just like things were to work so perfectly. And so in that it was like a million little things that she like did for them. So we of course have like both Annie and both of course, Sam going and saying magic at the same time. And we have Annie just crying at this point of this story. And so at some point, there's to be this commercial break, and I'm like, man, so these people are to be put on the phone and like wait for this commercial break. And Sam is asking Jonah, it's like, what do you think that they're doing here? And Jonah is to tell Sam, it's like, well, hey, she's gonna have a bunch of people call in and kind of dish the fact that like you were to go on and like talk about all this. So we go on and we have some women who are saying like, "Hey, can I get this guy's number? Can I write him? Can I whatever?" Because we have Jonah, who I guess was to supposedly give them their phone number, so that way he can get on the air, just in case maybe they dropped a call or something happened. They could try to get back to them or whatever reason. Because this is kind of like the internet, where sometimes you'd have to like re-dial somebody up, so to speak, to get them from a Skype call or something like that. So we go on and we have kind of Sam getting this all off of his chest. Uh, so eventually, what happens after this is that Annie, after this whole thing where she is to go on and hear this story, we eventually have Annie who makes it back to her work, and she's going on and talking to, I think it's Becky, but don't quote me on. Oh my god, names! Wow, I actually know names for some odd reason. So we have Annie and Becky just kind of gushing about this story, uh, and that's Rosie O'Donnell in this film, and because she started bawling about this story, and it's like, well, yeah, like they start talking about all these old commercials where there's just this one little sad moment where they just start crying, and these two other guys are just like, well, I guess it's like you had to be there kind of moment. As we have like James Dean cutouts and Marilyn Monroe cutouts, and weirdly in the background of this scene. So but we also had Annie that is going to some restaurant, and she is to mention, it's like, man, I would love to get this guy's phone number. And uh, one of the waitresses are like, hey, get in line. So we go on and we have Sam, who is to eventually think like, you know what, like I think it's time for me to go and find a gal, because it seems that Jonah is to uh, start to get a gal of his own, which of course is to be a girl named Jessica. And so we eventually have it where once Sam is to see his son with Jessica, he's like, well, you know what? I think I should just step out and I should just go out with a girl. And so we go on and we have, of course, Sam going and talking to Jay here after we go on and have both Sam and Jay going to talk to this woman, and she wants them to take down one uh, seemingly load bearing wall, so that way they can like spend or waste more money on just making this house perfect for this woman. We go on and we have Sam and Jay go out, and he's like, well, like, what are we like, what am I supposed to do? Like how do I go about approaching like women now? And so Jay is like, well, just ask them to like come to your place to look at swatches. And he's like, swatches? Are you kidding me? Like, do you remember seeing any old movie where anybody would go through and like, hey, come look at my swatches? And like, Jay's like, well, yeah, like I think there was like some Audrey Hepburn movie or some kind of something where it's like, hey, come with me to see my swatches. So we go on and we just have Jay tell Sam, it's like, well, here in Seattle, a lot of times we have the women who are to go on and make the move of like where they're gonna go, what time they're gonna be at a place, and whatever. And we have Sam who like is like, ugh, like I don't know if I'm gonna like that. Like, ugh, I don't know. So, but after we have Sam go on and see his son with a girl, listening to Paul is Dead on some record, he's like, oh yeah, I know about the Paul is Dead thing. And so, because we have Jonah who's mentioning that he's with Jessica or with somebody and they have cable, and so Jonah is watching some movies that he should not be watching, and but Sam doesn't say anything about it because it's like, hey, like I guess we just have like Sam who's just really like chillaxed dad, um, for the most point, even when his kid is to just on his own just ship his or plane his way off to freaking New York City of all places towards the end of this film. So we go on and have Sam moving on to go and talk to a girl named Victoria. So we have it to where Sam is going and talking to this girl on the phone, and she, of course, is to take charge with this whole thing. And Sam is just like, well, okay, how about we. Oh, so you want to. Oh, okay. So. And so Sam is just like, okay, like I didn't have to do the work there. So here's the one goofy thing. Like we had when Sam and Jay were to go on and eat together, we had like Sam like eating clams or oysters or something. I think it was oysters. And so I'm like, wow, is that going to be a really good meal? Like I guess from really looking at it, like oysters are I guess like an aphrodisiac at some point. From what I remember from certain things at some point. So we go on and we have Sam meeting up with Victoria, and so we have this date, and before before Sam was to leave, we had Jonah going on and seeing a number of these letters that Sam was gonna that Sam was getting from a number of women, still from this whole radio thing. So we go on and we have it where Annie had wrote to them, and so of course Jonah is to love this letter because Annie is to mention how she loves this third baseman, and coincidentally, so does Sam. And so we go on here, and we of course have it where uh, Sam is to go off and be with Victoria, and all of a sudden, Jonah is to call Sam in the middle of this dinner, and basically Sam is to say like, hey, like if anybody is to get poisoned, have ipecac here. I'm like, why do they have ipecac just at the ready? That seems like a weird thing to have. Like who's gonna get poisoned in this house? So, but we go on and we of course have Sam in the middle of his date all of a sudden get rung up by Jonah saying that they need to be at New York on Valentine's Day because it's to, of course, be from the reference of that one movie that I guess Becky and Annie are to love, and they've seen it a number of times. So we go on and we have, of course, consistently Sam is to mention to Jonah how ridiculous that sounds because none of this is to be from a local girl who is to want something to be locally done. Where we, of course, have Sam bring up the fact that Baltimore is not close to Seattle and that New York is not Seattle. And so we end up having Sam who is going on and asking Jonah if Jonah is hurt, if this babysitter is to uh, be restrained or hurt at some point. And so Jonah's like, well, no. It's like, well, then don't call me during my date. So Sam goes on and is to be trying to make, of course, Victoria laugh. And I guess Victoria is to laugh like a hyena here. So we of course have Sam go on and date more of this girl to just kind of try her on because that's what he tells Jonah. It's like, well, yeah, like considering now I'm in the dating game, Jonah. There's certain people where you kind of have to like try them on like shoes to see if they kind of fit, and so Victoria is kind of one of those people. So we go on and we have Annie who is like turning on the radio station late at night, and all of a sudden they are to replay the greatest hits, I guess, of this radio station. And the Sleepless in Seattle thing is to come back on, and they show and they replay the whole, like, basically scenario that Sam is to talk about his wife and how everything was just magic. So all of a sudden, we coincidentally have Jonah, who is to see both Sam and Victoria kind of going and kissing and whatever, and Jonah is to call this radio station just kind of upset because uh, his new dad's girlfriend is to be some kind of hoe. So we go on and have eventually Jonah to hang up this call, and he goes on and he is to just scream, and so Sam runs back into the place and it's like, hey, what's going on, Jonah? And he's like, I thought I saw a spider. And he's like, oh my god, like heaven forbid there's a spider in this house. Like, couldn't you have gone on instead of screaming bloody murder, come to me and said, like, hey, Dad, there might be a spider in this house. Could you please go and kill it for me? And I would gladly come in here and kill it for you. Like, you had just scared me half to death, and you also had frightened Victoria. So we go on here, and so what ends up happening in this film is so eventually we have Annie who's to go out with Walter, and they're going through jewelry, and so we of course have Walter who is to give Annie this ring that is to be his mother's size down, and because evidently Walter's mother had big fingers. So we go on and we consistently have Annie that's kind of questioning. It's like, well, hey, Walter is a good enough guy, but it seems that Annie is to consistently have cold feet. Really going on and just being with Walter in this film. So to the point where Annie is to eventually go on and hide in her little broom closet or whatever, and Walter is to find her, like, oh, Miss Scarlet, in the kitchen with the radio. So, but we go on here and we have Annie who is going and telling her people that she's going to go on and investigate this story, and they're like, okay, go ahead. So, Annie is to go and find out, uh, like Sam Baldwin's information, and so she goes on to make it to Seattle because really they have to go on to New York anyways. And so Annie's mentioning that she'll be in New York by Valentine's Day, and then we have it to where Annie's to realize how like weird this story is, and that she's marrying Walter, and what is she doing with her life. So we go on and we have Annie who is to just kind of still go after Sam. And so we have it to where now Sam is to go on and follow, or Annie is to go on and follow Sam at some point, finding out where he lives and kind of just stalking him. So we go on, and we now have Sam, who's kind of doing some boat stuff with Jonah, meeting up with a girl named uh, Susie, which we don't quite know who exactly Susie is. Could that possibly be some relative of his? Could that possibly be some uh, wife's friend of whoever? Could they just be friends? Don't know. But we, of course, go on and have eventually where uh, Sam is to go on and tell both Greg and Susie about this outlandish story about the whole um, Empire State or Empire State Building and meeting on Valentine's Day, and all of a sudden Susie is to know this movie of why this girl is to say all this, and she's to start crying about it, and so all of a sudden Sam is like, you know what? I would love to feel that same kind of way about a movie. And then he's like, oh, wait, like, I remember this one film, and he starts like, and then, like, Greg all of a sudden is to kind of, all of a sudden start blubbering also in a very comedic, like, approach here. She's like, yeah, and the part where they just start, like, blowing up the guys and blah, blah, blah. Like, they just start crying about this, like, war movie or something. And like, yeah, it gets me too every time. It's like, so since obviously Jonah is to not go on and get his dad to go to New York, Jonah is to just decide to use Jessica to get him to New York. And so once Sam is to realize that Jonah is gone, he is to go to Jessica and desperately want information out of her of where is his son. And so we have it to where Jessica is to consistently use these abbreviations where we of course have Jonah that writes back to Annie and saying that it sounded like her letter was really neat and that they might be made for each other. So we go on and we have Jessica who says NY, and her father thinks that she said no way. And Sam is like, that's NW. So Jessica's mentioned that, of course, Jonah is to go to New York. So now Sam is to scramble off to New York. So we, of course, go on here and we have Annie that is to finally just tell Walter that the relationship between them just isn't working out. Like, she thinks that Walter is a wonderful guy, and but just like there's something about this relationship where Annie just cannot commit to Walter. So Walter is to go on and just be like, well, like maybe I'll find my lucky somebody. Like this, like just also feels so much so like of course you got mail, where eventually uh, Meg Ryan's character is to be with the guy who is to be this typewriter guy that is to, I guess, be interested in some other woman, and so Meg Ryan is to eventually be interested in Tom Hanks's character. So so we go on and we have, of course, Annie going to the Empire State Building, and I guess she's running a little late because I guess she was supposed to be there at 7:30. So Jonah is at the Empire State Building and he's kind of waiting out there like all day long for Annie to show. Jonah is going through and checking to see uh, if Annie is to be any number of these people because I guess he doesn't have an actual photo of her. So so eventually Annie is to show up at here the last minute to kind of go up there and take Jonah's backpack without really realizing it. So before that, Jonah and Sam are to have this embrace, and Sam is to ask Jonah, it's like, well, I'm not a bad father, am I? Like, to have you just scramble off and run off to New York like this, like, I'm not, like, what am I doing? Like, what am I, like, I haven't treated you poorly, have I, kind of thing? And so Jonah's like, no, he just felt like he needed to do this. And so both Sam and Jonah are to go off in this elevator, but that they end up coming back to go and get Jonah's things because he forgot them. And then all of a sudden, that's when they meet with Annie. And so Sam is like, hey, I can't just let Annie go now. Like, I've seen her too much and too often, and now, like, it's love at first sight kind of thing, and I just can't let her go. And that's how this movie just kind of finishes off. So, with that said, I think there was probably a ton of stuff there that I kind of quickly went through or ran through and whatever. But I think I got the meat and potatoes of most of this movie, and it's kind of weird that I could finish this movie off so quickly. Is there anything left that I can probably go on and talk about here? Um, I don't really think so. I don't think anything else is really all that important enough for me to want to go in thorough, in depth about. So I think with that said, as I was kind of just double checking the cast list there to kind of confirm or whatever of anything, but no, I think this is good enough. I think I'm just going to call this one. So with that said, let me know how you felt if you've ever seen Sleepless in Seattle. If you've never seen this film, maybe you hate this film. Let me know in the comments below about Sleepless in Seattle. More than likely, maybe nobody had went on and watched this whole thing, but if you did, I really appreciate it. Uh, there is a lot of funny parts in this film, a lot of stuff where I go through and I question certain things and I have fun with the film. So yeah, with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.